The moment John lifted the translucent sphere above his head, and the golden light emanating from it enveloped the entire town square of Serenity Valley, transforming the tense standoff into a spectacle of harmony that would leave an eternal mark on the hearts of everyone present, the simple beekeeper understood his life would never be the same. But to understand how we arrived at this transcendental moment, we must go back 3 months, when it all began with a silence that chilled John to the bone. It was a golden autumn afternoon when John opened one of his oldest hives and found the impossible silence where there should have been life. The characteristic buzzing that always soothed him had ceased completely, replaced by a heavy quietude that seemed to suck the very air around him. His bees, creatures he knew better than people, were motionless, as if frozen in time, arranged in perfect circles around something that made his eyes widen. At the center of the hive, protected by a dome of wax denser than anything he had ever seen in his 40 years as a beekeeper, pulsed a small translucent sphere. The light emanating from it was soft, almost hypnotic, reminiscent of a living heart beating. John reached out, driven by a curiosity that didn't seem entirely his own. But the moment his calloused fingers touched the smooth surface, a wave of heat ran through his entire body, and a low hum, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once, echoed in his mind. "What in the—" he murmured, instinctively recoiling but keeping his eyes fixed on the sphere, which now pulsed more intensely, as if awakened by his touch. That first night John could barely sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw fragmented images, endless fields of flowers, gigantic swarms moving in impossible geometric patterns, and always that sphere at the center of it all, radiating a presence he couldn't define as benevolent or menacing. In the following days, strange phenomena began to manifest on the property. The fields around his house bloomed out of season, creating a vibrant carpet of colors that contrasted dramatically with the surrounding autumn. His other hives began to produce a different honey, more golden sweeter, with a flavor that made those who tasted it sigh with pure pleasure. The flowers opened at night, radiating a soft luminescence that transformed his garden into something out of a fairy tale. Wild animals that would normally flee any human presence began to approach without fear. Deer grazed peacefully a few feet from his porch, rabbits ran between his legs as he tended the hives, and birds of species he had never seen in the region built nests in the trees near the special hive. But along with this supernatural beauty came unsettling omens. The sky seemed constantly overcast, even on clear days, as if an invisible storm hung over his property. Migratory birds began to fly in circles above the hive, creating hypnotic patterns that lasted for hours. And at night, when the silence of the countryside should have been absolute, John swore he could hear voices whispering his name, coming from the direction of the apiary. John, the voices were soft, almost melodious, but there was something about them that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Some nights he would get up and walk to the window, observing the special hive, which now radiated a constant soft but unmistakable light in the darkness. It was during one of these sleepless nights that he decided to seek answers in the only place that could have them, his grandfather's belongings, stored in the attic for decades. Old Joachim had been a beekeeper before him, and before that, even before the town of Serenity Valley officially existed, he had already kept bees on that same land. Climbing the wooden stairs that creaked under his bare feet, John opened the attic for the first time in years. The smell of mildew and forgotten memories enveloped him as he rummaged through dusty boxes, searching for anything that could explain what was happening. That's when he found the diary, bound in leather worn by time, with yellowed pages that seemed to sigh with each turn. His grandfather's diary contained detailed notes on beekeeping, family recipes, and on the last pages, something that made John's heart race: drawings of the sphere, accompanied by text written in a shaky script that betrayed the urgency with which it had been written. "The heart of the hive," read the first line, "a legend our ancestors whispered around campfires, but which I saw with my own eyes. A force capable of connecting all living beings, of bringing harmony where there is conflict, of healing where there is hurt, but also something that can attract eyes that should not see, minds that should not understand." The following pages detailed encounters with the sphere, experiences similar to those John was experiencing, but also dark warnings. Outsiders began to appear. They ask questions, offer money, talk about scientific research, but their eyes are cold as stone. I know they want the heart, not to understand, but to possess, to use. The last entry, dated a few days before his grandfather's death, was a direct warning. If one day the heart awakens again, whoever finds it must be prepared. It chooses its guardians, but it also attracts its predators. The choice between protecting and destroying may be the most difficult anyone has ever faced. John closed the diary with trembling hands. Now he understood why his grandfather had been so reserved in the last years of his life, why he rarely spoke about the family's past or about the secrets of beekeeping that he seemed to know instinctively. The next day, the first strangers appeared. They arrived in dark cars with out-of-state plates, wearing clothes far too expensive for a small town like Serenity Valley. The first was a middle-aged man with impeccably groomed gray hair who introduced himself as Dr. Ricardo Menezes, a researcher of anomalous biological phenomena from the Federal University. "Mr. John," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we've received interesting reports about unusual biological activity on your property. Flowers blooming out of season, atypical animal behavior. We'd like to conduct some studies, naturally with your permission and adequate compensation." John observed the man with the suspicion of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people's intentions through their gestures and expressions. There was something about Dr. Menezes that deeply unsettled him, a coldness behind the professional courtesy that set his self-preservation instincts on high alert. "I don't know what you're talking about," John replied, keeping his voice steady. "My property has always been like this. Bees do what bees do." The researcher's smile stretched a bit further, becoming almost predatory. "Mr. John, we're reasonable people. We understand there might be initial resistance, but the phenomena here are of national scientific interest. We have authorization to investigate, with or without your cooperation." "Excuse me," said John, starting to close the door, but Dr. Menezes put his foot in the doorway. "Think carefully, Mr. John. We're the good guys here. If you don't cooperate with us, others might come. Others who won't be so civilized in their approaches." The veiled threat made John's blood boil, but he maintained his composure. "Get off my property." Now in the following days, others appeared. A woman who claimed to be an investigative journalist, but who asked overly specific questions about the beehives. A rural antiques collector interested in any interesting artifacts he might have found. An agribusiness entrepreneur wanting to buy his land for an absurdly high price, without even knowing it. They all had one thing in common: cold eyes and a determination that went beyond professional interest. They were predators sniffing out prey, and John knew exactly what they were hunting. During this period, his connection with the sphere intensified each day. When he approached the special beehive, he could feel the bees' emotions as if they were his own. He knew when they were happy, when they were agitated, when they sensed danger approaching, and they, in turn, seemed to respond to his thoughts, moving in patterns that reflected his emotional state. One afternoon, while watching the sunset from his porch, John realized he was no longer alone in this strange journey. Mrs. Carmelia, his 73-year-old neighbor known for her folk wisdom, approached carrying a cup of herbal tea. "You've been worried, John," she said without preamble, offering him the cup, "and it's not just about those outsiders hanging around." John accepted the tea, surprised by the woman's perceptiveness. "You noticed." "I noticed your bees are different, smarter, more conscious, and I noticed you're different too." She sat in the chair beside his, observing the apiary in the distance. "My grandmother used to tell stories about things like this. She said that the earth sometimes produces gifts that test those who receive them, dangerous gifts." John murmured. "All true gifts are dangerous," replied Mrs. Carmelia with a wise smile. "The power to heal is the same as the power The choice is always ours. That night, John made a decision that would change the course of everything. Instead of continuing to hide, he would confront the situation head-on, but not alone. In the following days, he began to discreetly talk to other residents of Serenity Valley. He discovered that many had noticed the changes on his property, but far from feeling fear, most were fascinated and strangely calm. Mrs. Mary, who had suffered from insomnia for years, said she slept like a baby whenever the wind carried the sweet scent of his night-blooming flower. Old John Antonio, a retired farmer who had been battling depression since the death of his wife, claimed that he felt inexplicably happy and hopeful whenever he passed near John's property. "It's like nature itself is embracing us," he said, tears in his eyes. "I can't explain it, but it's the first time in years that I feel like life is worth living." These conversations revealed something John was beginning to suspect. The sphere wasn't just affecting his property, but the entire community around it. It was as if it radiated an energy of healing, connection, hope that touched everyone who approached with an open heart. For those who know the importance of stories like this, which reveal the strength of community unity against selfish interests, remember to subscribe to continue following reports that show how simple people can make a difference when they unite for a just cause. Then the predators showed their true faces. Dr. Menaces returned, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought a whole team, men in dark suits with scientific equipment, lawyers with official documents, and even private security guards who didn't bother to hide the weapons under their jackets. "John," said the researcher, with the same coldness as before, but now without trying to disguise the threat, "this is your last opportunity to cooperate voluntarily. We have court orders for the investigation of anomalous biological activity and federal authorization for the requisition of material of national scientific interest." John observed the group at his doorstep, feeling a cold rage rising in his chest. "And if I say no, then we will execute the warrants with or without your approval. Your property rights are temporarily suspended for national security purposes." The absurdity of the situation would be comical if it weren't so terrifying. There stood a simple man who had spent his entire life tending bees and living in harmony with nature, being treated as a threat to national security because of a phenomenon he barely understood himself. "You don't even know what you're looking for," John said, his voice steady despite the fear he felt. "We know exactly what we're looking for," Dr. Menaces retorted, and for the first time, his eyes gleamed with what seemed like pure avarice. "An artifact of unknown origin with properties that defy known laws of physics, something that could revolutionize not only science, but the very concept of power." And there it was, the stark truth. It wasn't about scientific research or national security, it was greed, pure and simple, the same greed that had driven his grandfather into hiding decades ago, the same greed that now threatened to destroy not only his life, but potentially the sphere and all it represented. John closed his eyes for a moment, sensing the sphere's presence even from a distance, like a second heart beating in sync with his own. He could feel his bees, agitated but awaiting his instructions. He could feel the earth beneath his feet, vibrant with life and energy, and he could feel something more, the presence of all the neighbors the sphere had touched, united by an invisible but real connection. When he opened his eyes, his decision was made. "Very well," he said, surprising Dr. Menaces with his sudden acquiescence, "but there are conditions. First, everything will be done publicly, in the town square, so everyone can see. Second, you will have exactly one opportunity to examine what you seek. And third," he smiled for the first time in weeks, a smile that held decades of simple wisdom and quiet courage, "if you fail to comprehend what you see, you will leave and never return." Dr. Menaces frowned, clearly suspicious of John's sudden change of attitude. "And why would you agree to this now?" "Because," John said, looking directly into the man's cold eyes, "sometimes the only way to protect something is to show it to the whole world." And so it was that 3 days later, the entire population of Serenity Valley gathered in the town square to witness what many would later describe as the most extraordinary moment of their lives. John arrived carrying a simple wooden crate, the kind used for transporting beehives, but everyone could see the soft light emanating from within. Dr. Meneses and his team had set up scientific equipment around the square, cameras, sensors, devices whose names and functions only they knew. "Before I open this crate," John said, his voice carrying across the square without the need for a microphone, "I want everyone to understand one thing. What you are about to see is not mine. It never was mine. It is ours, all of every living thing that breathes on this earth." Dr. Meneses made an impatient gesture. "Enough with the rural melodrama. Open the crate and show us this supposed artifact." John nodded, and slowly opened the lid of the crate. The sphere rose on its own, floating gently to eye level, radiating a golden light that made many gasp in awe. But then, something that not even John expected happened. The sphere began to pulsate more intensely, and with each pulsation, small beams of light extended from it, touching each person present in the square. Upon being touched by the light, each person saw something different, but all saw the truth. Mrs. Carmelia saw her youth, not as nostalgia, but as accumulated wisdom transforming into hope. Old John Antonio saw his deceased wife, not as loss, but as eternal love that continued to nourish his soul. The children present saw a world where all creatures lived in harmony, where fear was replaced by curiosity and greed by generosity. And Dr. Meneses, he saw his own childhood, when he dreamed of being a scientist to help the world, before ambition and power corrupted his ideals. He saw what he had become, and what he could become again. His equipment registered impossible readings, energy that defied all known laws, yet at the same time seemed perfectly natural. His cameras captured images of indescribable beauty, but when they tried to digitize the data, they discovered that the information simply disappeared, as if the technology itself refused to reduce that moment to mere numbers and codes. "This is Dr. Meneses murmured, and for the first time since John had met him, his voice carried genuine awe instead of greed. "This is what happens when we stop trying to possess and start trying to understand," John said softly. "The sphere is not an object to be studied or controlled. It is a lesson about connection, about how we are all part of something greater." The sphere's light intensified one last time, enveloping the entire square in a soft golden luminescence. In that moment, all barriers fell. Rich and poor, young and old, local and outsider, all felt the same thing, a profound connection to one another and to life itself. When the light finally subsided, the sphere had returned to its normal luminosity, floating calmly in front of John like an obedient pet awaiting instructions. Dr. Meneses looked at his equipment, at his team, at the official documents he carried, and then looked at John. He swallowed, struggling with words that seemed inadequate. "Forgive us, we didn't know, we thought it was." "You thought it was power to be conquered," John finished without judgment in his voice. "But true power cannot be taken, it can only be shared." At that moment, Dr. Meneses made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He approached John, and in front of everyone, knelt down. "Teach me," he said, with genuine humility for the first time in decades. "Teach me to see as you see." John smiled, not a smile of triumph, but of compassion. He extended his hand, and helped the man to his feet. "The first lesson," he said, "is that there is nothing to teach that you don't already know deep in your heart. There are only things to remember." And so the crisis ended not with confrontation, but with understanding. Dr. Meneses and his team withdrew, but many returned later as visitors, not researchers, seeking not to study the phenomenon, but to learn from it. The sphere remained with John, but its presence became known and respected.
People from all over the country began to visit Serenity Valley, not to see a spectacle, but to experience that feeling of connection and peace that emanated from the small rural property. John never charged admission or turned his discovery into a tourist attraction. Instead, he received visitors as he received his bees, with patience, respect, and the understanding that some treasures are more valuable when freely shared. A few months later, as he watched the sunset from his porch, now frequently joined by neighbors and visitors who had become friends, John reflected on all that had happened. The sphere continued to pulse gently in the center of his special beehive. His bees continued to produce their extraordinary honey, and his property continued to radiate that energy of healing and hope. But the greatest transformation had been in himself.